Our starting point this morning is Senator Marco Rubio dropping his efforts to draft a Republican alternative to the DREAM Act. The decision comes just days after President Obama announced a similar plan on Friday. Under the new policy, the Obama administration will not deport most young people that have been brought illegally into the U.S. by their parents. In an interview, Rubio said he and other Republicans were not consulted about that plan and criticized the move as an election year pander to Latino voters. Here's what he said on Fox News last night.
Very significant issue that needs to be solved in a long-term way that's measured, reasonable, and balanced, and decided by edict, by fiat, basically, to solve it in the short term, which happens to coincide with the November election.
Joining me this morning, Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming. Nice to see you, sir. Marco Rubio clearly makes it seem as if he thinks it's very, very political and very similar to what he was going to propose anyway. Would you agree with him? Are you disappointed and angry?
Well, I agree with Marco Rubio. You know, the president said that in his first years in office, this would be one of his highest priorities, to deal with the issue of illegal immigration in this country. The president failed to do that, pushing through a very unpopular health care law. He pushed on his cap and trade program, raising energy prices for people, but yet the president ignored this until just 5 months before an election. And Marco Rubio was working in a bipartisan way, Republicans and Democrats alike, to look for a long-term solution to one of the issues of illegal immigration. Well, the president, by doing what he did, has basically, I think, delayed finding any kind of long-term solution and has actually made the problem worse.
Explain that to me. Why a delay? Because Marco Rubio, as you know, never had an actual proposal. So why do you think that means a delay now with what the president's done?
Well, Marco was working with Republicans and Democrats alike to come up with a solution for a concern that he has raised and he has worked with and has been a signature issue for him. And yet the president, by doing what he has done by presidential edict, basically deciding that the law of the land doesn't matter, that he as president chooses, as one person to just have the law of the land not be enforced, is something that I think is wrong for the country, is not a way for a government to work, and excludes the American people in the decision-making. And the American people are involved in making laws of this land, participating in democracy, electing people, and then going from there.
The first presidential order.
You know what's interesting is, let's hone in on Senator Barrasso's criticism here. It seems to be about the process through which the president pushed this legislation through, or pushed this edict through the executive office. So Senator Barrasso, I'm curious to know then, on the merits of the issue, on the actual merits of the policy the president seems willing to pursue. It seems to be largely similar to Marco Rubio's proposals. Do you support the merits of what the president is proposing?
Well, I'm not talking about yes or no on the merit. I'm talking about the fact that we have laws on the books and the president is deciding as one person to not enforce the laws.
No, and I hear you on that, but I think Will's question is, we gather that. So moving on to the merits, do you support the merits or not?
No, I think we ought to enforce the laws of the land. Illegal immigration continues to be a major problem in the United States.
Sounds like
we have people waiting to come here legally, and we should not be rewarding people who have come here illegally. And I'll continue to fight for that position. I support what Marco Rubio is working on, in the sense that you're right, we have not seen the final efforts, but he's been working in a bipartisan way with people to look for a permanent solution to one of the issues of illegal immigration, something that could pass the House and the Senate in a bipartisan way, with a buy-in of the American people, and then would be the law of the land.
So you would support something if it were permanent, and that's what you have an issue with, because
it sounds... And pushed through the democratic process, it sounds like.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Back in 2007, when you were pitching a bill, which was called the Barrasso No License for Illegals bill, you said, frankly, this is just a small bite of the growing immigration national security problem. It makes sense to fix those things that can be done right now, meaning you tackle the things that are in front of you. It sounds like something a little bit, in some ways, similar to what's happening here. It's not?
Well, that had to do with driver's licenses for people who are in the country illegally. I oppose giving driver's licenses to people who are in the country illegally. It is a form of identification. It is often viewed as an issue related to citizenship. I am opposed to that and will continue to oppose any efforts to give illegal immigrants driver's licenses. And I raised this at the time when the then governor of New York was promoting a piece of legislation. It was Eliot Spitzer at the time was supporting legislation to give driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. I do not think that should be done, and I think ultimately that was pulled back in New York State
but your point was that instead of tackling, forgive me for interrupting you, sir, but your point, my understanding was that instead of tackling the national reform of immigration was, let's work on this small thing. This is just a small bite of the growing problem, is what you said. It makes sense to fix those things that can be done right now. Ergo, we're going to focus on driver's license because this is a little piece that we can handle right now. Sounds like the young people, sort of the DREAM Act kids that people have talked about, would be that same little thing you could do right now, which is what the president's done. Is that wrong?
Well, the president has chosen to not enforce the law of the land. What Marco Rubio was doing with the legislation he was working on in a bipartisan way involving Republicans and Democrats alike, House and Senate, he was working on fixing an area of concern that he was focused on, which was just not all of illegal immigration, not the entire immigration issue, but this focus on a certain select group, just as I was doing with the driver's license law. So that's why what I think what Marco was working on, something that would pass the House, pass the Senate, and get signed into law, is very different than a presidential edict that the president saying, you know, I'm above the law. I get to decide, the president is saying, what the law should be and what laws that I will choose as president to ignore. And I don't think any president should do that.
Senator Barrasso, what would it take, Margaret Hoover here, to actually get comprehensive immigration reform through? Because as you know, President Bush and Senator Kennedy worked very diligently on a comprehensive immigration plan in 2006, 2007, and it went down in partisan flames. So, you know, we can talk idealistically about a comprehensive immigration reform plan, but what's it going to take?
Well, you just said went down in partisan flames. I thought it went down in bipartisan flames. They were, because you mentioned President Bush as well as Senator Kennedy, who may have supported and others in a bipartisan way opposed that proposal. It's going to take an effort of people really addressing, first securing the borders, making sure that the borders are secure, and then dealing with the issue of the folks that are here now illegally who have broken the law. And it's a much bigger debate. But what Senator Rubio was focused on and what I was focused on in 2007 is a component of that. And as you said, work on one part of that at a time. And that's what Senator Rubio has now withdrawn because of the divisive efforts of the president in this run-up to the election to try to go after a certain segment of the population.
Congress has been tackling immigration reform since 2001, then 2007, then 2010 twice. So, yeah, it's going to be a long haul, I think. Thank you, sir. We appreciate your time this morning, Senator Barrasso.
Thanks for having me.
You bet.